Michigan Out of Doors Online is brought to you in part by Tri-County Logging. Experienced in sustainable forestry practices, Tri-County Logging can help you manage your property by keeping your woods healthy and generate income. Serving southern and mid-Michigan for nearly 50 years, TriCountyLogging.com. Well, hey everyone, welcome to Michigan Out of Doors. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We've got a brand new show, but we are going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to sit down with Chad Stewart, the big game specialist here in the state of Michigan, and talk all things deer hunting. We're going to cover the new registration system, antler point restrictions, baiting, you name it, we're going to talk about it. It's going to take up all of this week's show, but it's a lot of really good information. So you stay tuned. I'm Jimmy Gretzinger, and it's time for Michigan Out of Doors.
From the first spring rains to the soft summer breeze, dancing on the pine forest floor, the autumn colors catch your eyes. Here come the crystal winter skies. It's Michigan, Michigan out of doors.
What a beautiful day in the woods.
Someday our children all will see this is their finest legacy, the wonder and the love of Michigan. As the wind comes whispering through the trees, the sweet smell of nature's in the air. From the Great Lakes to the quiet stream, shining like a sportsman's dream, it's a love of Michigan we all share.
Michigan Out of Doors is presented by Country Smokehouse, a sportsman's meat processor and Michigan destination since 1988. Offers a variety of homemade smoked meats and Michigan-made products in-store and online. The Country Smokehouse features an outdoor barbecue and bar. Details at countrysmokehouse.com. By RBM Jigs, a Michigan-based company serving ice fishing anglers around the state and throughout the country. Specializing in ice fishing gear, RBM Jigs manufactures tungsten jigs, soft plastics, and much more. Online at lakeeffectlures.com. By AnglerQuest Pontoons. AnglerQuest is a Michigan-based company building boats designed for comfort and fishing functionality. For more information, anglerquestpontoons.com. By Polarcraft Boats, offering riveted and welded boats for the outdoor enthusiast. Whether you're targeting fish or waterfowl, Polarcraft Boats have several models to choose from that keep you high and dry. For more information, polarcraft.com.
All right, well, we are here today with Chad Stewart, the big game specialist here. I don't know if that's the official title these days.
That works, yeah.
Yeah, so I know this. We just kind of want to talk deer and maybe even some elk here today, but kind of the big thing I would think in your world over this past year was the new reporting system of how people can register their deer after a harvest. So kind of walk me through that process from big picture down to small. Like, how did that go this year? How did the information come in? Was it surprise? Just kind of walk me through, your take on that whole system.
Yeah, the reason we made this switch really has to do with declining response rates in how we traditionally estimate harvest. So for those who aren't familiar, we estimate harvest historically through a postseason survey that goes out to a random subset of hunters, and then we get some sort of statistical estimate based on the responses that we receive, and then there's confidence intervals around each of those metrics that we collect. And essentially over the past 20 years, our response rates to those surveys has been declining. It went from I think over 70% in the early 2000s to under 40% a couple years ago. So what that means is that we can still develop and generate an estimate, but our confidence intervals are greater, which basically means our level of uncertainty is greater around those estimates. So, we had an opportunity now to initiate this, harvest reporting program, which pretty much every other state in the Midwest and most states, in the country are incorporating. So we felt it was a really good time to do that. So that's really what facilitated some of those changes. Obviously a big change for Michigan hunters. We've never done this before, but overall, I think it turned out really well. We spent a lot of time planning for it. It's not to say that it was perfect, because it certainly wasn't. We certainly had some growing pains with it, but at the end of the season, we had over 300,000 deer reported through that system.
Okay.
So clearly, hunters adopted that system pretty quickly. Got the message got out and seemed to be received, and we typically estimate our deer harvest in our state around 400,000. So when we have 300,000 coming through that program in the first year, I think it was really successful.
Are there some things that you would maybe do differently for like this? I'm sure it's something that you can kind of tweak along the way. Anything you saw this year that like, oh, we'd like to fix that or change this or?
Yeah, I mean the system operated really well. So I mean we were really happy with how the operation of the system worked. There were always, it's kind of what we're working on right now, is sort of our evaluation of that program. Certainly one of the topics that came up that we heard was some, I guess, uneasiness around the mapping portion of the harvest, where we're asking hunters to identify, on a map where they harvested the animal. So that's certainly something that we're evaluating right now, whether or not that needs to continue, or if we should do away with that or change it somehow.
I think that was one of the things that came a lot, that we heard a lot of, is like, why in the world would they want us to put down, exactly where in the county we were, and whether, what if I don't really know exactly where I was, that kind of stuff. But I mean, is that something that, if we just put just the county that they were in, that might be a change moving forward then? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that we're going to look into. So the reason we had that mapping function included initially was because we wanted to try to think forward ahead about, some of the things that we can do with this program and how it might translate to improve management in the future. So for one thing, we've talked a lot about various, deer diseases and management. One of the things was to integrate location data with, surveillance for those individuals who submitted a deer for TB sample or CWD sample. That location data within the county is really important from a disease management perspective, because those diseases generally aren't widespread evenly around a county. They're clustered in areas. So we want to understand what's going on there. Additionally, if there was a new positive animal that popped up somewhere in a new location, it could serve as a notification system for hunters moving forward. So if someone shot a deer and it tested positive for chronic wasting disease in a new county, say, we could incorporate a message that for hunters that report a deer in that part of the county, hey, we found a new case of CWD in this area. If you're interested in getting your deer tested, because that's important to you, here are some locations where you can get that deer submitted. So we thought that there would be an information component to it as well. So tying it to disease was really important. Additionally, I thought there would be a really unique opportunity to look at deer management at a finer scale than what we're able to do at the county level. Because we know that deer, even within a county or a deer management unit, if we're talking about the Upper Peninsula, aren't distributed evenly throughout that county. There's places where there are more deer and fewer deer, and if we can get reasonably confident location data and see that there are trends with deer herds either declining or increasing in parts of that county, we could account for that in some of our management decisions.
Okay.
So the other piece is that the point data is protected from the Freedom of Information Act. So once you put that point data on the map, we don't have to divulge that if somebody's asking about that information.
I think that's what people were kind of worried about, is like, well, now they're going to know where I'm at, and they're going to leak that to somebody else. And
no, it's completely protected. And that's one of the reasons why we went with that point data, because it offered that level of protection. But certainly we understand the uneasiness associated with that.
That was a big one.
Yeah, and so that's something that we're taking a critical eye on moving forward. Now,
was there, I don't know if you know this information, but was it online versus the app? Could you tell which one was used more? Or?
Yeah, I don't quote me on the numbers, but I think I'm close. I think about 86 to 87% of our reports came in through online.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so most of them came in through like the web-based application. Most of the rest came through the app.
Okay. Because I had this situation a couple different times this year where I went out with older hunters that barely can turn on their phone, let alone get online. And so I was going to report forward with my dad and another buddy from church that I took out. Is there any way, and I don't think you can do this through the app, but it would have been nice if the app would have given me the opportunity to enter someone else's information on that. Is that something that could happen in the future?
Yeah, we're going to have a button, and it may actually already be on there now, but report a harvest for someone else.
Okay.
So you can just simply click on that, because the one thing that was nice about the app, but in some cases there's like a learning curve with it, so it wasn't necessarily intuitive. When you go through and report your harvest, you almost have to go through your license that you have on
Right.
your app. And we have the buttons on there that indicate that's where you're supposed to do it. But sometimes you don't know where to start. So once you
Yeah.
start at the right spot, you can go
Okay.
through it.
Yeah.
But we are going to have like a button on there that says report for someone else. So
Oh, that's great.
that makes it a little bit easier to provide assistance for hunters who can't do that.
So the information that came in from this year being more almost real time,
Yeah.
within a couple of days, is there anything that stood out to you that surprised you, whether that was in one of the regions or just overall that from the harvest this year?
Yeah, so one of the things that was, I think, really encouraging was that, proportionally when you break out how the harvest looks within the southern lower, the northern lower, and the upper peninsula, it was pretty proportional to what we've historically estimated. So that sort of tells us that we're not seeing necessarily one region that's either over or underrepresented through reporting. And that was maybe a concern going in what that would look like. I'm just starting to dive into some of this data now, and it's kind of really fascinating, because one of the things that we have available to us now is daily harvest records. We never had that before. So we always had like season harvest numbers that were like
Yeah.
lumped together. We never had it broken down by day. And one of the cool things that I thought was that we had over 45,000 deer reported on opening day of firearm season this year. When you think about how many minutes or even seconds of daylight are available for hunters, it turns out that Michigan hunters are taking more than one deer a second on opening day of firearm season. So it's just one of those like mind-blowing statistics. The other thing that I thought was really cool is we had more deer reported on opening day, which this year, of course, was a Tuesday, than the last 9 days of firearm season combined. So when you think about, and I hear this from hunters a lot, that we have all these long firearm season, we're putting a lot of pressure on the deer herd. I don't know if that's necessarily true, because not every day is equal. It's very disproportionate in how hunters are utilizing those days. And clearly those first couple days of the season, and then maybe the next following weekend, is where you're having a bulk of the effort expended by hunters as reflected by the harvest. But a lot of those other days just are very minimally participated in, at least from a harvest standpoint that we can tell.
So do you know bow versus gun season, are they 50-50? Is it way skewed, most of them are taken during the firearm season?
So over half of our deer are reported through the firearm season.
Okay.
And then when you add the archery season, I think you're over 80% of the total harvest that's reported through just those two seasons. So again, that's one of the other, I think sometimes criticisms that we see, that Michigan has so many of these deer seasons, and there's just a lot of pressure being applied. Over 80% of our harvest is occurring in firearms and archery season. All those other seasons that we have very low participation and very low harvest relative to those two big ones.
So Chad, another big topic that, well, I guess it's been a big topic for 20 years, but antler point restrictions. The northwest part of the state, or the northwest part of the lower, seems to have gone well, continues to go really well. Talk to me about that kind of that mid-Michigan area. I don't know how many counties were, but that Montcalm County area that had them, or Ionia County. Then we don't have them. Kind of where are we at with APRs across the lower and the upper?
Yeah. So we had I guess it was really an experiment it was a 5-county, what we call study area, and 3 of those counties had antler point restrictions applied to them. So it was Mecosta, Montcalm, and Ionia counties, and then we were looking comparatively at Kent and Newaygo counties. So this was something that our Natural Resources Commission, asked us to do years ago. really in response to some of the chronic wasting disease that's particularly been found in some of those areas. And with the understanding that chronic wasting disease is a big topic in our state. Antler point restrictions are a big topic in our state. Like, let's see what happens if these two things can coexist. So let's run these two things together, because you can't necessarily do an antler point restriction study in another part of the state and sort of extrapolate what it looks like in a CWD area, because the presence of CWD may or may not impact how hunters view that. So they wanted to put it right in that area. So we're working with some researchers out of Michigan State University. That study just concluded the field component of it, but there's a lot of data analysis that goes into it. So specifically, we've got all the harvest data that comes from that comes through every year. But in addition to that, what we have are, with cooperating landowners, we're putting trail cameras out and trying to get what I will define as relative abundance. So basically, the total number of animals in these areas, with the understanding that we can't generate population estimates for the entire county or the entire 3-county area. It just takes too much effort. So instead, we're almost getting like small samples out of different parts of each county.
Is that something that where those APR, I know it was part of a study and that study ended, but I think that would run over really well in those counties, including the camera guy that's behind the camera right now. I was wondering, how do we get those to come back?
Yeah, so this is part of the evaluation process. This was always meant to be a 3-year process, and to the individuals who are really promoting and sort of pushing APRs, one thing that is very clear from our history is that once they become established in a location, support for them either maintains or increases in most cases. So I think that's something that really needs to be highlighted a little bit more, that I think pretty much every survey that we're doing shows greater than 50% support for APRs, and then where they exist, support for maintaining that regulation is often a lot higher. So
you can see a real change in just a couple of years.
It is probably unequivocally the best regulation that we have for advancing age structure in our deer.
Now, so if that's the case, why not just say, okay, the whole lower, here's the deal, we're going to do APRs, or this, the southern half of the lower?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be part of the conversation moving forward. I think we have to talk about that. What's really challenging is that, well, first of all, every regulation that we put in, some people are going to really love and cheer you on, and other people are going to hate. But one of the things that we've always been sensitive to is that when a hunter purchases a license, we're leaving it up to them to make the management decision on what makes them individually happy. And everybody's perspective on what to harvest is different depending on, a multitude of things that are going on in your life. So in some ways, you're telling an individual that you must do this, which may or may not align with your specific value system. And so I completely understand that. On the other side of that coin is, we view hunters as our best management tool. And with declining hunter numbers, we need to make sure that our hunters are continuing to manage the deer herd in an appropriate way that not only keeps the population in check as much as possible, but we also want them to have a quality experience when they're out there. So we try to balance those two things, and sometimes that's a really difficult needle to thread.
Well, and one of the ways that I know, obviously we're trying to harvest deer, and hunters do a good job of that, and one of the ways that they could harvest maybe potentially more deer would be if there was some bait in front of them, depending on where you are in the state of Michigan. Not so much southern, but the northern part of the lower for sure, and then the upper. And I know we put some stuff out on Facebook that we were going to be talking to you, and of course baiting comes up, and so I feel like we're kind of beating a dead horse to a certain degree, but is there any movement in the baiting world? I mean, we do, obviously we can bait in the UP, and then there's some bait for some special seasons here and there, so it's like, why in the world can we have it here and here, but we can't have it here?
Yeah. That was a really good segue that you had, by the way. So you're right. So I will say that, when we make a regulation, the big thing that we look at is what is the impact of that regulation. Yeah. So, we made the decision, I think it was in 2018 at this point, to remove, the opportunity to bait from the lower peninsula. And since that time, we've not seen a decline in any of our harvest at all. So it may certainly impact certain individuals and their opportunity to be successful at taking a deer, but from our viewpoint, from a population management standpoint, our numbers haven't changed.
Could that be because everybody's still baiting?
It could be. I mean, and we're not naive. Like, I mean, we travel and fill up gas, and
every gas station in northern Michigan
exactly.
has a big, big pile of bait there.
So the impact of that regulation, I think, is sort of still undetermined, because we know that it's very clear that people are baiting. So from our standpoint, we can put the rule forward, and we have conservation officers that are out there trying to enforce it. But
if you did, like kind of what you just said, you're looking to see it didn't really have a huge impact on the overall take, so then it's like you could make a case, well, if it didn't really matter that much, then let us back at it. You're letting the UP hunters do it, and some of the youth hunts, or some of those different hunts, but what do you say to that sportsman who's like, well, just let us have it then if it's not going to hurt anything?
Yeah, no, I get it, and what we're still trying to do is really trying to maintain, the recommendations that we receive from national experts in terms of disease transmission. And, a lot of those individuals and the information that we hear and sort of use for guidance from a disease management standpoint indicate that increased or artificial concentration of deer around bait sites that are repetitively replenished over and over again increases the potential for disease transmission, specifically between family groups that might be visiting that. So to answer your question, I don't think that regulation change is going to come, at least from our recommendation, to make that change.
And so just so people are, I know we've covered this before, but just in case, so if that was to make a change, so let's say you are like pro bait, we're going to do this, you can't make that decision. Kind of walk me through how that actually, like, how can those decisions be made?
Yeah, so the two ways that, game laws become, laws, primarily is through a recommendation from the Department of Natural Resources that goes through our Natural Resources Commission. Okay. And our Natural Resources Commission is a 7-member panel appointed by current and previous governors to, evaluate the recommendations that we bring forward and take into account anything else that might be sort of, out there in the atmosphere, whether it's, the economics, politics, I mean, you name it. It could be anything. And just what hunters or even non-hunters want or don't want. So they listen to public input, and then they make their decision on whether to support, reject, or ultimately change, our
So the
recommendation.
NRC ultimately would make that decision, or can you go through the legislature too? That'd be the other way?
That's the second way.
Okay.
A game law can be introduced is through a legislative option, which that is a much more what I would call permanent fix, because it takes a little bit more effort between both houses agreeing to that regulation and ultimately the governor signing off on it. But then ultimately to change that, you have to go through that process again, whereas the Natural Resources Commission is much more flexible, malleable, that can be changed if something is in fact a bad choice.
Now, another thing that I know we've talked about before, and I'm assuming it's the same way, that it would have to go through the NRC first and then or legislature, moving the opening day to coincide with a Saturday or a weekend, kind of a thing. And if we saw that big of a spike on a Tuesday opener, how much bigger would that spike would have been had it been on a Saturday? Is there any movement along those lines? And if so, what path would that have to take to get changed?
Yeah, right now that would have to be changed through our Natural Resources Commission. That's where that language currently resides. Okay. We're actually trying to do some analysis on this right now, and I would expect some conversations about that, over the next couple months with our commission. Should they be interested in hearing it? That being said, some of the things that we've been looking at, we've not been able to really detect any type of trend based on whether that November 15th starts on a Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. Yeah. The way it looks sort of at the end of the year is pretty consistent, even though that variability might change with the location of the start date. So I think we're going to have a lot of interesting and cool data to at least talk about that.
Yeah.
And whether or not that changes or not, certainly is not my choice, but I think there's some pros and cons about going either way, and I think that's ultimately going to be up to the people to decide, after looking at the data, what they prefer, this option or the other option.
Special thanks to Chad, and we will have some viewer questions for Chad coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you so much for joining us this week for Michigan Out of Doors. Make sure you stick around in upcoming weeks. We've got plenty more winter excitement headed your way. We'll get out on the ice for some more ice fishing. We'll try a little rabbit hunting, and we'll give you some spring walleye tips to get you ready for the spring season. And we'll, of course, set our sights on our big buck nights east and west. If you'd like to see a little bit more behind the scenes about Michigan Out of Doors, you can always check us out online.
Michigan Out of Doors is presented by.
Do you dream of somewhere bigger than your backyard? You can get there with Greenstone. Whether you want to hunt, fish, hike, or just watch the sunset, we're ready to help you own your place in the great outdoors. To learn more, visit greenstonefcs.com.
By Alta Equipment Company, providing sales, rentals, service, and parts because uptime matters. From earth moving to landscaping and light construction, Alta offers over 50 brands across 7 Michigan locations to serve you. More information online or 844-GO-2-ALTA. By Walker's Creek Event Venue at Double D Ranch. Located in the central Michigan town of Lake, Walker's Creek offers an outdoor setting for weddings, corporate events, and more. Walker's Creek Event Venue, wcvenue.com. By Showspan, producing consumer shows including Outdoorama at Novi's Suburban Collection Showplace. The show features tackle, trips, boats, outfitters, the trout pond, and of course, Big Buck Night. That's Outdoorama in Novi.
When I wander far away, a dream stays with me night and day. It's the road that leads to my home state. I am a Michigan man. Changing seasons paint the scene like rainbow trout in a hidden stream. The white-tailed deer in the tall pine trees. I am a Michigan man. I am a Michigan man. Ask where I'm from and I'll show you my hands. Lord above, I love this land. I am a Michigan man. From the Keweenaw down to St. Joe, Kalamazoo, east to Monroe, to St. Marie and back again. I am a Michigan man. I am a Michigan man. Ask where